Yesterday, we probably won't see that again, but 10s or 11s should be pretty well widespread, so a little cool on Sunday, but not cold, though the exception, of course, once again, is Scotland. And briefly for Tuesday, the concentration here of rain is likely to be in southern Britain. It remains cold, but brighter in Scotland.
From 1 minute to the next, anything can happen. To keep you up to the minute, BBC News 24 brings you the latest headlines every 15 minutes, 24 hours a day. Continuous news coverage as it happens on BBC News 24.
Sport is all about timing. Miss it and you miss out. BBC News 24 sports updates are at 16 minutes past every hour, so you'll always know the score. All the main sports stories every hour on BBC News 24.
Zapatista rebel leaders are given a hero's welcome in Mexico City. The left-winger Bertrand Delano is well ahead in the race for mayor of Paris. The UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan criticizes Taliban for destroying Afghanistan's Buddhist statues. And Japan prepares for more turmoil on the stock market despite government reports of some growth in the economy. Hello, this is BBC News with me, Clarence Mitchell. Well over 100,000 supporters have turned out to witness Mexico's Zapatista guerrilla movement become the first rebel group to march into the capital's main plaza since 1914. The rebels led a procession of their supporters through the streets of Mexico City in the climax to a 2-week nationwide march. Along the way, they've been gathering support for their demands for greater rights for the country's indigenous people.
It's become known as the Zappa Tour, and it ended right here in the heart of Mexico City. Winding up a 2-week rally around southern Mexico, the Zapatista leader was greeted by cries of "Long live the Zapatistas" by a crowd the organizers numbered at 200,000. Police estimates, though, put it at half that figure. Either way, it was a historical moment. For the Zapatista leader, Subcomandante Marcos, it was a moment of great triumph. This is the end of a bloody uprising that began 7 years ago. The Zapatistas also become the first rebel group since the Mexican Revolution to ride into the main city square for almost 90 years. Although they've failed in their grand ambition to liberate Mexican civilians and conquer the Mexican Federal Army, they have raised awareness of the plight of 11 million Mexican Indians. The Zapatista leader Subcomandante Marcos's declaration that the time has come to sharpen words and not swords has won him a large following at home and abroad. He marched into Mexico City at the head of a procession that included foreign leftists who'd seen the Zapatistas as part of an international fight against rampant capitalism. Once outlaws, now they're treated as heroes. They've even been offered protection by the police, and the Mexican president has received them with open arms. President Vicente Fox has said he supports the rebels' goals to have Indian rights enshrined in the Constitution, but opponents say this would destabilize Mexico. So no guarantees for the future, but the sheer weight of support for the guerrilla army could propel it into a true political force. Khalid Javed, BBC News.
Our correspondent Peter Grester is in Mexico City, and he says the real significance of the march lies in its scale.
I think the sheer scale of the demonstration today was really significant in that it showed Mexico and the Mexican government once and for all just how widespread the support for the Zapatistas really is. I think this tour has gone far better than any of the Zapatistas could have hoped for. They've constantly built support over the past few weeks with every stop that they've made. They've been on the front pages of every newspaper. The discussion has been at the top of the political agenda, and I think the government will now find it very, very hard not to make at least some concessions towards the Zapatistas' demands.
But these are rebels by nature. Is it really the case that they've renounced violence for good and that they are looking towards the political path for settlement now?
I absolutely think so. In fact, I think that they're not rebels by nature so much as poor country farmers who figured they had no choice but to take up arms to really make the point. Apart from a dozen days of combat right at the very beginning of this conflict, there has never really been any open fighting between the Zapatistas and the government. And although they've technically remained under arms, they've really transformed themselves into much more of a political movement than a guerrilla force. And I think it would be very, very difficult for them to go back to arms, particularly now with the goodwill that they've built up inside Mexico and around the world.
As you say, they have goodwill, they have the president's backing, but isn't the reality that the Mexican Congress is divided and hostile, and that the changes that they want to see are not by no means can be taken for certain?
Absolutely. In fact, the old government was led by the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which objected to the constitutional changes because they said that those changes would threaten the integrity of Mexico. Now, that party still is the largest party in government. They don't hold a majority, but it is going to be very difficult for the president to convince them that now things have changed, and in fact the union is secure, and that the Indians deserve these rights enshrined in the Constitution.
Peter Gresta in Mexico City. In Europe, exit polls in the French local elections suggest there's been a strong swing to the left in the capital, Paris. If the socialists are successful, it'll be the first time in more than 100 years that they've been in control of the city. Voters have gone to the polls in more than 36,000 cities, towns and villages across France.
Inside the Paris town hall, people were examining the minutiae of the results, but the broad picture could not have been clearer. The citadel of the right had crumbled, with implications stretching far beyond Paris, particularly for President Chirac and his chances of re-election as president next year.
It's bad news for Chirac because he based his career on Paris, and he always said, I will do in France what I did in Paris. So it's definitely very bad news. But now the presidential race is another story, a different story.
The right in Paris now have 1 week to get their act together if they're to have any chance of fighting off Bertrand Delanoë, the socialist candidate who's done so well in the first round. But in country areas where voters had to walk across a carpet of disinfectant to get to the polling station because of the threat of foot and mouth, President Chirac's party fared better. A corrosive mixture of cronyism, kickbacks and corruption seems to have done for the right in Paris their stronghold for over 100 years. In the longer term, it tips the balance in favour of Lionel Jospin for next year's presidential elections. These results are worrying for Jacques Chirac. John Sopel, BBC News, Paris.
A court case involving a former executive with the Elf Aquitaine oil company, meanwhile, is expected to resume in France on Monday morning. Alfred Servin was arrested in the Philippines last month after 4 years on the run. He's accused of taking part in a misappropriation scheme involving $400 million of Elf's funds. The trial involving the former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas has captured the attention of the French public, with the prosecution claiming that Monsieur Dumas illegally benefited from payments made by the oil company to his former lover. The United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan has criticised the Taliban authorities in Afghanistan for continuing to destroy all of the country's Buddhist statues. Mr. Annan was speaking in Pakistan, where he had talks with the Taliban Foreign Minister Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil. Mr. Annan said that he'd been told that all movable Buddhist statues had already been destroyed, but that the demolition of the 2 giant Buddhas carved into rock at Bamiyan hadn't yet been completed.
In destroying the Bamiyan statues, the Taliban leadership ignored an international outcry. In their ultra-strict interpretation of Islamic doctrine, the statues were an inducement to idolatry and therefore unacceptable. Kofi Annan arrived in the region already too late to prevent the dynamiting of the rock Buddhas. But he shook hands anyway with the Taliban Foreign Minister, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, whose colleagues had rejected not only Mr. Annan's personal appeal, but those of the Organization of Islamic Conference and the world's most senior scholars of Sunni Islam to stop the destruction.
Yes, I did discuss the statues with the foreign minister, and I walked away from the meeting not very encouraged. Basically, he confirmed that all movable statues have been destroyed, and that the destruction of the 2 statues had begun, but he could not tell me the status of the demolition. and I had hoped for a much better news, and we then went on, and I must say, I find if they do carry through this lamentable decision, I think they'll be doing themselves a great deal of disservice, and they'll be doing a great deal of disservice to Islam, in whose name they claim to be doing this.
The Taliban are still largely unrecognized by the international community as a legitimate government. This move, widely denounced as cultural vandalism on a massive scale, won't win them any new friends. Fergus Nichol, BBC News.
Israel has further tightened its blockade on the Palestinian territories, virtually sealing off the West Bank town of Ramallah. The Palestinians, though, have accused Israel of turning their areas into prison camps. The Israelis, however, say they're acting to prevent further violence.
Separated from the outside world, checkpoints ensure few are allowed in or out of the West Bank town of Ramallah, and a 150-metre-long trench ensures no one can try to bypass this tight security. The Palestinians say their homes have been turned into prison camps. The Israelis say the extra security is vital to stop the repeated attacks they say emanate from Ramallah, but the measures could backfire. Some Palestinians are so enraged they have threatened to retaliate with more violence.
There must be movement, maybe this Wednesday, when the national and Islamic movements call on all our people from all over to turn out to these checkpoints and not surrender.
The new Israeli Prime Minister has been in office less than a week, and it seems he is already taking a hard line against the Palestinians. A few days ago, Ariel Sharon had appeared willing to meet the Palestinian leader for talks, but he now says this won't be possible in the current climate of violence.
Sorry, I was disappointed yesterday when Arafat in his speech did not call for cessation of hostilities. On the contrary, today in the Arab press, he says very clearly in an interview that he gave to a Saudi newspaper that the terror will continue. And if the terror will continue, I don't think we'll be able to reach what we really want so much to reach, and that is peace.
By cutting off Ramallah and other villages, many Palestinians fear their economic situation could become even worse. In recent months, hundreds of thousands of people have fallen below the poverty line as a result of the blockades which prevent them travelling to work. 9 Arab countries have now pledged to do more to help them. They are to organise the distribution of millions of dollars of aid directly to those who need it. But for now, these Palestinians are even further isolated, and any attempts to rebuild relations will not be easy. Samantha Simmons, BBC News.
NATO officials seeking a ceasefire accord between ethnic Albanian guerrillas and Serbian forces in the buffer zone in southern Serbia say they're optimistic that agreement can be reached. The NATO mediators were speaking after a second day of meetings, including one in which a senior NATO commander flew to the guerrillas' mountain base just outside Kosovo.
Yugoslav forces ready and waiting for their first NATO-approved deployment since the end of the Kosovo War, barely 2 years ago. Their task is to secure the area where southern Serbia, Kosovo and Macedonia meet, and so block off an easy route into Macedonia for rebel fighters. But without the agreement of ethnic Albanian commanders, who control large parts of the area of Serbia's border close to Kosovo, they won't be going anywhere. And after 2 days of talks, brokered by NATO, there's still no sign of a truce. Serb officials say the Albanians haven't been able to agree among themselves on the terms, and until they do, say they cannot guarantee the Serbs' safety. In the meantime, both sides have temporarily laid down their arms, and the peace has held for the first time in months. NATO leaders say they are optimistic an agreement will be struck sooner rather than later. The ceasefire is also aimed at moving to political talks and a permanent solution to a low-intensity conflict which has been running for more than a year. In the past 2 weeks, it spilled into Macedonia, prompting fears of another wider conflict in the Balkans.
This weekend there were high-level talks between Macedonian and Albanian leaders, which resulted in unusually harsh condemnation of the extremists from the Albanian side.
We say no to all extremist terrorists which are against the security and stability of our friend Macedonia.
On the ground, the fear of violence continues to drive hundreds of ethnic Albanian villagers and their children from their homes. They bring what possessions they can with them and speak of constant gunfire exchanges between rebels and Macedonian forces. For them, the nightmare of conflict in the Balkans has started all over again. Paul Anderson, BBC News, Belgrade.
2 leading Chechen rebels have been arrested in connection with the murder of 3 British engineers and a New Zealander in 1998. Their headless bodies were found in a village on the outskirts of Grozny. Police said they were killed after a rescue attempt went wrong.
These pictures released by the Russian authorities showed the Chechen rebel leaders being taken away for questioning. The arrest of Ruslan Akhmadov and Badruddin Murtazayev is a major coup for the Kremlin. The men are accused of multiple kidnapping and murder. Ruslan Akhmadov is now being interrogated by the Russians. He's the man suspected of ordering the kidnapping and beheading of 3 British telecom engineers and their New Zealand colleague in 1998. Peter Kennedy, Darren Hickey, Rudolph Pesci and Stanley Shaw were abducted in Grozny that October by a group of armed men. The video filmed by their captors showed the hostages had been starved and ill-treated before being killed. Their remains were later recovered and flown home. Russia says the Chechen rebel leaders will be put on trial once the investigation is finished. Caroline Wyatt, BBC News, Moscow.
This is BBC News, a reminder of the headlines. Mexico's Zapatista rebel leaders have been given a hero's welcome in Mexico City. In France's local elections, the left-winger Bertrand Delanoë is well ahead in the race for mayor of Paris. And still to come, it started years ago as a subversive cartoon, and Madam and her maid continued to delight post-apartheid South Africa. Investors are bracing themselves for another week of turmoil on the stock markets. On Friday, Wall Street was rocked when the Nasdaq index of high-tech shares closed at its lowest level since 1998, and nearly 60% down on the all-time high it peaked at exactly 12 months earlier. There was worse news in Japan, where the Tokyo stock market closed at its lowest level in more than 15 years. Prime Minister Yoshihiro Mori has announced he intends to bring forward elections for the leadership of his Liberal Democrat Party, but in the last few hours he strongly denied reports that he intends to resign. It's escalated fears of a recession and brought speculation that Japan is heading for a period of deep crisis unless Mori is replaced quickly and new policies are put in place. Well, our correspondent Clive Myrie is at the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and he says the news this morning there is not quite as bleak as was predicted.
Well, it's better than expected, Clarence. A lot of people expected a percentage rise of 0.6% for the last quarter GDP figures for Japan. A little bit higher than that, 0.8%. So the country is not officially in recession, but the economic picture is still not very good. And many analysts are expecting the situation to get even worse for the next quarter of this year because of the onrush of the effects of the downturn in the US economy. So the overall picture not very good, but these specific figures showing a little bit of an increase and a little bit of an improvement in the Japanese economy.
Even so, that's presumably not enough to stop shares opening lower than would have been expected.
Well, that's right. You join me at the stock exchange here. The numbers have been going south pretty much all morning. The stock prices have been falling here, and they have, as you say, been hitting 15-year lows daily for the last few months. The overall economic picture is not good at all, and I think part of the problem here is that there is also a political crisis taking place here. As you say, Yoshihiro Mori, the Prime Minister, has indicated that he is going to step down, and there are no real candidates who are willing to step up to the plate, as it were, and take this country by the scruff of the neck and deal with the economic problems that have been endemic here for the last decade.
Well, indeed, that political vacuum, if that is not resolved soon, what is likely to be the effect? This recession, the fears of recession, surely will harden into a reality.
Absolutely, Japan has managed to stave off recession so far, but as I say, the overall figures aren't good. The problem is that there is an overall lack of confidence in the economy here and in the leadership of the country to actually sort out this crisis. Japan has been bumping along towards recession, dipped into recession a few years ago, and has managed to creep out of that over the last couple of years. But it's been bumping along the bottom really for a decade, and the radical restructuring that is desperately needed here to deal with the banking sector and some of the major institutions, there seems to be a lack of political will to deal with that. And many analysts are saying that while the figures this morning are encouraging, they're really just a blip, and the fact is the economy will continue to go down in a downward spiral.
Clive Murray at the Tokyo Stock Exchange. The Prime Minister of Thailand, Thaksin Shinawatra, is calling for an explanation from Burma about the growth of what Thailand calls a drug production city close to the Thai border. Mr. Thaksin said satellite photographs had revealed the drug production facilities at Mongyorn, which is controlled by the ethnic Wa group allied closely to the Burmese military authorities. Police in Brazil have stormed a juvenile detention centre to quell an uprising during which inmates took around 40 hostages. Armed with knives, sticks and at least 3 guns, 350 inmates of the Franco da Rocha detention centre went on the rampage. 1 person was killed and 20 others were injured in the violence. The inmates were protesting at alleged abuses at the centre. Police fired rubber bullets to restore order. The reformist Iranian President Mohammad Khatami has defended his reforms in a rare address to the Iranian parliament. He said Iran had no choice but to ensure the future of democratic government. He didn't say whether he intends to stand again in elections that are scheduled for early June.
Never before had an Iranian president taken the unusual step of reporting back to the nation through its elected representatives. 4 years on from his dramatic landslide victory, it was a somber Mohammad Khatami who stood before Parliament. His hopes for reform have been heavily obstructed by hardliners who still hold a lot of real power. Mr. Khatami left open the key question of whether he'll stand again in June. He said only that he would continue to serve the people as long as he could take a step forward with their support. There's no doubt that President Khatami is still very popular. He would win the election easily if he does run. Wherever he goes in the country, thousands of admirers turn out to see the man on whom they pinned their hopes for change. But after 4 years of disappointment, many people who voted for change are feeling frustrated, though few blame Mr. Khatami himself.
His hands are tied, otherwise he could do a lot. At least he showed the people that he wants to do things, but he can't. The freedom he provided was great.
If he could run the country on his own, I would be happy. The problem is that he's not in charge. He may be president, but he has no power. Other people hold the power, and they haven't let him work.
Many of his promises were not fulfilled, especially this last year when there's been a lot of obstruction. Khatami's patience was good to begin with, but it's too much now. People can't take it anymore. Every day we have more bad news.
Not everybody's so sympathetic. Friday prayers in Tehran is a traditional gathering point for hardliners.
We aren't opposed to the President Khatami, but I think it's not good for the president again.
Many ordinary Iranians may be more concerned about economics than they are about politics, but these are tense times here in Iran. The reformists may have done well at the polls, but they've lost out heavily to a hardline counter-offensive. They're determined to make of this upcoming presidential election a turning point in their affairs, but that won't be easy to achieve. Jim Muir, BBC News, Tehran.
South Africa's best-loved comic strip about a rich white woman and her black domestic servant has been turned into a sitcom. Madam and Eve has been entertaining South Africans for nearly a decade now. It satirises the relationships between black and white people, but it also highlights the country's economic divisions and the political mistakes of its former apartheid bosses and its new black elite.
White boss, black maid. The relationship every South African knows is going from long-running cartoon strip to sitcom.
She's protesting by not doing her work. She's on a go-slow.
Black maid Eve Sisulu usually wins her fights with her white Madam Gwen. Like any sitcom, it's not real life. But these characters are so popular because they're so familiar. Yet, in the new South Africa, Madam and her maid should be a thing of the past. Out of character, the actors who play Madam and Eve make a rarer sight. Black and white friends on equal economic terms. It's not only the sitcom roles which need to change in South Africa.
Madam's alive and well, and she wants to try and change, and she's trying her best, but she's got years of baggage sitting on her back, if you know what I mean.
What we need to do is just to empower each other, you know, and empowering each other is simple as maybe Madam should take me for computer lessons. At least she takes me for driving lessons, and then...
Madam and Eve are big sellers here in cartoon books, and their characters are some of South Africa's most well-known people. Theirs is the quintessential relationship of apartheid, the inequality in wealth, power and opportunity. Yet, as black and white citizens, they share the same concerns about the future of the new South Africa. And that's where Madam and Eve are more revolutionary than they seem. Not just in their biting satire of race relations, they go further than many newspapers dare in their digs at the new government.
What's exciting about South Africa is everybody trying to get this thing right, this country of ours right. And the stumbles that are made along the way, and the occasional arrogance and hubris and pomposity of some of the politicians in that. So yeah, we deliberately set out to hit a few sharp blows.
So what if my son's dating a girl who's black? Black.
The sitcom strikes many a home truth, even though some of its scenes first appeared as cartoon strips nearly a decade ago. Back then, Madam and Eve were fighters against apartheid. South Africans are still laughing at them, but it shows how far this country still has to go. Jane Standley, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Rose, cancel my afternoon appointments. This could take a while.
The main news again this hour. Well over 100,000 people have turned out to welcome Mexico's Zapatista rebel leaders into the capital. And exit polls in the French local elections suggest there's been a strong swing to the left in Paris. I'm Clarence Mitchell, and this is BBC News.
Good morning. I thought I'll walk you through the next 2, 3 or 4 days to show you how much fun we're going to have trying to forecast this weather in any detail. A couple of things are sure. Pressure will be low all the time and there are fronts around, so rain is definitely on the cards. You can't tell very much else from the pressure patterns, but you can if you want to run the forecast winds. The computer model has them coming in from the west to the southwest for a while, and then there's a bit of a cold plunge starting in Scotland. That then dies back again. Then there's another cold plunge, a really cold one this time, but it only gets as far south as Scotland. So temperatures, generally speaking, will be reasonably on the mild side for England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Nighttime frosts start in Scotland. Briefly they appear midweek in England, but they're going to be a rarity otherwise. So an unsettled week ahead, which of course has already started. The rain has gone now from England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but it hasn't gone from Scotland, and increasingly, particularly behind Scotland, it is turning to snow. That'll be a slow thing to stop. It's drifting slowly northwards and it ought to be gone, I think, by the next 12 hours. So a frost then develops tonight in Northern Ireland, and with that, ice on many of the minor roads. A little bit of frost elsewhere that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But it's particularly Northern Ireland I think a focus on for the morning rush hour. There will be icy stretches and there'll be some fog patches which are already developing, so driving conditions will not be that good. In Scotland, of course, they'll be affected by the overnight snow falling in the Highlands, and of course there's still plenty of rain coming down and lasting for even the major roads. So there's the picture then as we greet it by dawn. Snow still falling in Highland Scotland, dry everywhere else, but not for long. Even though pressure's high, everything's mobile, remember. We're moving from west to east, so we've got showers moving quite quickly from Wales through England and just touching Northern Ireland as the day goes through. It could well be that the far south of Scotland is the only place that remains reasonably dry throughout the day. So the picture then of the morning, then after the morning sunshine has been capped off by the invading cloud, there'll be showers, and some of them are quite big. Hail or thunder are certainly likely, heavy rain showers. Again, if you're driving in that, the conditions won't be that good. They drift eastwards, so by the end of the day, briefly it might get a little drier in Wales before then the cloud really thickens up, and probably Late afternoon into the evening, Northern Ireland will see the sun disappear and the rain start to fall as proper rain rather than sunshine and then showers. If any racing does take place in this coming day, for example, Plumpton or Stratford-upon-Avon, the chances of getting a dry day are pretty negligible. So we'll go for showers, but with reasonable temperatures, around about 10 degrees. In fact, that will be a good reflection of everywhere in England. Drop down a couple for Northern Ireland and even back 1 or 2 for Wales. And for Scotland in the Highlands, 4 or 5 will be pushing it if there's snow on the ground in particular, but 7, 8 or 9 are quite likely for Glasgow and Edinburgh. On Tuesday then, the rain is most likely to be concentrated in the southern half of Britain, so we'll say central and southern England and Wales, with a rather dry picture by this time for Scotland, dry but fairly chilly at 7 degrees. If you moved further afield, you'd notice that we're not actually alone in this unusual weather. There's some fairly heavy rain through Central Europe. It's caused flooding, as you know, over the weekend in Hungary and the Ukraine. The thaw has been pushing through into Scandinavia. That'll continue, but might get cut off a little bit by Tuesday. If you're a sun seeker, well, you can go south. In fact, Iberia gets better, but so indeed do all the central and eastern Mediterranean islands.
Breaking the news. There was other damage caused by the blast.
It is right that we have a budget that puts families first.
I am grateful to Sir Anthony for clearing my name.
A chance to have a close look at the Bluebird.
24 hours a day, BBC News 24.
This year promises to be as unpredictable as ever.
With all those fluid interest rates and all the fretting that goes with them.
To survive, you need insight and knowledge.
Whether you're a bull or a bear.
Whether you're after a flotation or a fall.
World Business Report, bringing you the facts behind the headlines.
With in-depth analysis around the clock.
World Business Report pays dividends.
Weeknights at 11:30 on BBC News 24.
Hello, this is BBC News 24. Good morning, I'm Clarence Mitchell. It's 3:30, the latest national and international news stories. The Agriculture Minister, Nick Brown, has insisted that the foot and mouth outbreak is under control, although there are now more than 160 confirmed cases. There have been complaints from farmers about the number of animals whose remains have been left decomposing in fields amid fears that this could increase the spread of the disease. The government has promised to speed up the process of sending carcasses to rendering plants. Strathclyde police say a child's body has now been formally identified as that of the missing 4-year-old Luke Gargan. The boy's mother found his bed empty when she went to check on him at his home in Saltcoats in Ayrshire on Saturday morning. A 35-year-old man has been arrested and will appear in court later today. Abroad, and 2 leading Chechen rebels have been arrested in connection with the murder of 3 British engineers in 1998. Peter Kennedy, Darren Hickey, Rudy Petchy and New Zealander Stan Shaw were all kidnapped in October 1998. Their headless bodies were found in a village on the outskirts of the capital Grozny. Police said they were killed after a rescue attempt went wrong. It's reported that a Chechen field commander and a top aide to the warlord Shamil Basayev were arrested last Wednesday in Baku, the capital of neighbouring Azerbaijan. The Conservatives are calling for an investigation into claims that the Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, misled Parliament over the Sierra Leone arms affair. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Francis Maude, has written to the Prime Minister calling on him to establish an inquiry into whether Mr Cook broke the ministerial code of conduct. The move follows allegations that the Foreign Secretary briefed journalists about a report into the Sierra Leone affair before it was officially published, and then told the House of Commons that no advance briefing had taken place. In Mexico, more than 100,000 supporters have turned out to witness the Zapatista guerrilla movement become the first openly rebel group to march into the capital's main plaza since 1914. The rebels led a procession of supporters through the streets of Mexico City in the climax to a 2-week nationwide march. Along the way, they've been gathering support for their demands for greater rights for Mexico's indigenous people. Here, the government will announce later this morning how it's to spend the extra £200 million on teacher recruitment promised in the budget last week. Secondary schools in London, the South East and the Midlands are short of 1,500 teachers. At the same time, members of some teaching unions will begin industrial action today to stop covering for vacancies and absences of more than 3 days, affecting up to 1,000 schools. 2 Labour MPs have been warned by police that they are at risk from animal rights extremists because of their opposition to a ban on fox hunting. The Sports Minister, Kate Hoey, and the backbencher, Lynn Golding, have both been advised to take security precautions after their names were found on a target list. A report out today from a committee of MPs is expected to be highly critical of the way the licence to run the National Lottery was awarded last year. The Select Committee's report will examine just what went wrong, and it's likely to recommend nationalising the lottery rather than licensing a private sector company to run it as at present. Women's wear could be going out of fashion. According to a new report, spending on women's clothes has now dropped to its lowest level for 10 years. The research claims that although stores are offering lower prices to entice shoppers, women are more interested in value for money. It also suggests that female shoppers are spending their money elsewhere on DIY and holidays. Well, those are the main stories from home and abroad at just after 3:30. I'll be back at 4 with a full bulletin of world news. Now, here on BBC News 24, it's time for Dateline London.
London with me, Nick Gowing. Joining me this week, Marie-Françoise Golinski from the French newspaper West France, Thomas Kielinger from Germany's Die Welt, Michael Goldfarb from Boston's WBUR in the United States, and Richard Stott of the Microsoft Network, formerly of the Daily Mirror. Well, Scotland Yard have confirmed from forensic evidence that the real IRA bombed the BBC News Centre a week ago. In the past 7 days, it's become clear that a more radical nationalist force determined to fight for the end of British rule in the 6 northern counties is emerging. The real IRA is thus becoming like the provisional IRA, which broke away from the official IRA for not being radical and violent enough. But the provisionals remain signed up through their political wing Sinn Féin to the peace process, which, as we saw this week with the hasty, apparently inconclusive meeting between Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern in Belfast, is faltering. And as a signal of their concern, Sinn Féin suddenly signalled a new willingness to press the decommissioning issue again. Marie-Françoise, what about this?
I wonder if they can, really, the Sinn Féin, because I'm not sure that actually Gerry Adams and all the Sinn Féin, party and so on, are in control of any...
You think they're being marginalised by the radicals now?
Absolutely, because you have a splinter group within a splinter group and so on, and you have such determined people who want to go back to violence that actually I don't think that he can control.
Michael?
Well, the real IRA has been around almost since the ratification of the Good Friday Agreement. And in fact, it was only 2 months later that they blew up the centre of Omagh in the worst atrocity of all the Troubles. And the real IRA is centred in Dundalk and parts of South Armagh. It's a very small area, drawing on groups of small groups of people, really, no more than hundreds. I think that time is what creates this problem. The lack of implementation on both sides, as the Republican movement would see it. For the Republicans, changing the policing system in Northern Ireland is one of the paramount goals of this political process. Chris Patton's reforms of the RUC have not gone through. On the other side, decommissioning is the paramount aim of the Protestant side. That hasn't gone through. And as the years go by, the Good Friday Agreement was ratified in 1998. It's almost the 3rd anniversary of that. In this entropic political state, 15-year-olds in 1998 are 18 years old now, and they're quite happy as teenagers to get involved in violence.
Has the dragging of feet on decommissioning, therefore, radicalised? Now we're seeing the nationalist cause with the real IRA, Richard.
I don't think, I mean, the real IRA has been there all the time. They used to just be the right arm of the provisionals. And what has happened is that Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness have, after 20-odd years of carrying coffins and being stuck in rooms with peeling lino, have now met presidents. And they quite like it. And why shouldn't they? They're politicians and they want to be real politicians.
Yeah, what the analysts are saying is that the real IRA this week have achieved a new critical credibility.
What, by bombing the BBC? Yeah, well, maybe they have, but the problem for both Adams and McGuinness is going to be whether they can get this decommissioning through, and I suspect that they just don't have the wherewithal to do it.
Well, yesterday on radio he said we are delivering big time, Jerry Adams. Tom, do you believe he is?
Well, I think he's going to have to very soon,
because he says we are delivering big time.
Well, they're not. No, there's just not a single weapon has been given up. There's been no beyond the 2 inspections that have taken place.
Put
no
beyond use is the term.
Put beyond use is the word. And I think Sinn Féin, I mean, the chicken are coming home to roost for the Provos and for Sinn Féin, because if they let this situation fester without really getting the decommissioning thing moving, they will be the ones sidelined so completely, and they will lose the action and the momentum so totally and disastrously. It cannot be in their own interest not to affect some movement on the decommissioning side, particularly since all the experts and all around this table here know that giving up a few arms, just for show, I'm being deliberately cynical here, does not alter the weapons balance, as it were, anyway. Whatever arms is being handed over can be bought back overnight in a jiffy on the international arms market. So why the hell don't they just go for some semblance of goodwill to render some arms?
It's just not the way the Republican movement
I
thinks.
know.
It's never thought like that. And you know,
but then they should stop
it's not
shedding
going to
crocodile
happen.
tears about losing the initiative to the real IRA. They're not, you know, it's
but
true what you say.
The fact that the creation of the real IRA, when you go back and look at this stuff, you know, the alleged quartermaster of the Provos absconded during the final days of negotiation with a bunch of weaponry. What the Provos have, they claim to have taken in blindfolds this international commission to show them underground bunkers. Here they are, here are our weapons, they sit safely here, we won't use them. If they're used, you will know that we did that. And that's sort of where the movement was.
But there's a
real
new development, which is apparently, according to security forces, the Provos are now trying to radicalize themselves to counter the real IRA, even by launching reconnaissance missions on the mainland now.
If that's the case, then that's the case. I mean, the security sources sometimes say things. I haven't spoken to any security sources recently, so I don't know about that. If the movement begins to become even more fragmented than it is, then I find that that's a really dangerous law and order situation, because
is it retrievable, though? Is it retrievable?
Yes. And anything is retrievable provided there's movement at the highest level, which is the way things work in Northern Ireland.
It is retrievable, because there is a difference between the real IRA and the Provos, as opposed to the official IRA and the Provos. When McGuinness and Jerry Adams took over the running of the IRA then, and Sinn Féin, the difference is that the province is now largely at peace, and it's the first time for 30 years that people haven't been splattered against walls when they were trying to go to supermarkets, and they like that. So the people, in fact, both sides, Protestants and Catholics, are beginning to learn to live again. And if you can remove the grassroots support of the IRA, which 30 years ago, when the Provos were taking over from the officials, they had the grassroots support, they don't have it now. And the more that you can stop the bomb and the bullet in the streets, the more likely they are to succeed. Now, what the government needs to do is to implement the Patent Report. The RUC is ludicrous. It's got 90-odd% Protestants. No wonder there's no-go areas in the Catholic areas, because they don't trust the RUC, and they've had 30 years of not trusting the RUC, and nor would anybody else if 90% of it was run by people that you consider alien to you. So that's got to come through. They've got to do something like that. And the other thing is they have to take the Protestants with them, because there will be no settlement in Ireland unless you can take the Protestants.
But we've seen a former IRA man, someone who's known as someone in the IRA, appealing to a public gathering, we must stay united, which seems to be symptomatic of a fragmentation going on.
That's why I disagree with Richard again, because frankly I think that actually you need really a very, very small group of determined people who wants violence, and actually all the peace process is in tatters.
Where does this leave Adams and McGuinness, who are legitimate politicians now?
Well, they want to be politicians, they want to have power.
Yeah. Adams and McGuinness have established their bona fides throughout a process that stretches back to 1988, actually. And I think that, you know, it is possible to overtalk this situation which straddles the border. Obviously, there are security forces all over it. Both the Irish government and the British government sort of know what's going on. And what made this week's incident at the BBC so interesting is that over the last 2 years, there have been any number of raids on houses, actually not far from where the BBC headquarters in West London are, and they got in there just before the bomb went off. This time they missed it, And we almost had a disaster, but it wasn't a disaster.
Right, at that point, let's now move on. Richard, even after being cleared by the Hammond report into the Hinduja cache for passports allegations, has Peter Mandelson now disappeared from the political scene?
Absolutely not. I would have thought the chance of Peter Mandelson disappearing from the political scene are extremely
How does he
remote.
re-establish himself?
Well, I mean, how he's going to do that, I don't know. But he's already, I mean, the stories in the papers today about how he's still on the telephone to Tony Blair, which I'm sure is quite true, that he's apparently re-established warm relationships with Alistair Campbell. I'm sure Peter will be chattering away on the sidelines. What worries me about this whole Hinduja affair, two things. One is the predilection of politicians of all parties to be attracted like moth to the candle of very rich men, in the belief that somehow they're going to, that some of the money is going to rub off on them. And you've only got to go back through the history that, of the last 40 or 50 years to see that when politicians become involved with rich men, that inevitably is followed by some form of disaster. Now, the report, the Hammond report, is not so much a whitewash as I mean, they've only done one wall if it's a whitewash, because there's 3 other walls that they haven't approached.
What about the Prime Minister? How does he come out of this?
I think that he comes out of this as somebody who's obsessed with the media coverage, because the reason that the panic happened on that morning was because all the papers were full of the horrors of scandal. But actually, if you look at it, there was not a shred of evidence that there was any scandal there at all. Hammond hasn't turned up any. The only scandal was that the newspapers were saying that there was some. And what Peter Mandelson did, and is still wrong, and why he went in the end, was because he didn't tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, first of all to Alistair Campbell, and secondly on television. This meant that the Prime Minister's position
But he
was
said he didn't
compromised.
lie, I didn't deceive, I did not set out to mislead.
He didn't. He may not have done, but he did not tell the truth. He didn't tell the truth about the jackstraw element of it, where he'd been told that there was a conversation. He didn't tell that to either Campbell or to Chris Smith, and as a result, they put out an erroneous story.
Marie-Françoise, you've been concerned about something completely different, something that happened in the Oxford Union earlier this week. Michael Jackson shedding tears.
Oh, yes.
Have you really been concerned about this?
Yes, because I think they were crocodile tears, really. Because really, he's such a controversial personality, you know. We know, I don't know, maybe it's
sobbing for a children's charter.
Yes, but you know very well that actually he had problem with young boys as well, and so on. Yes, it is cruel.
But the message still can stand on its own feet, even though it was
you are
delivered by the
such
wrong
a soft, wonderful
person.
little
The wrong
soul.
person
That
delivered.
man is...
The messenger is faulty, but the message is all right.
Okay, I'm not absolutely sure.
Tom, you've been covering something which no one seems to have been aware of in Britain.
It's almost embarrassing, isn't it? You think
Well,
that
give us
you've
the
been,
details
probably
quickly.
you've been hoisted on the Peter. No, it was a rather improminent occasion early this week at the National Gallery, where a new
In London.
a new exhibition of German 19th century paintings was dignified by the presence of 2 heads of state: the British monarch, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, and the German president.
Well, I
And,
searched the papers the following day and
Oh,
couldn't
well,
find any
you would if
reference
you
to
could
it.
search until you're blue in the face. I don't know why my colleagues from the British media are so inadequate when it comes to covering ceremonial events. I know that per se, the appearance of 2 heads of state does not necessarily make waves. But
why should it make waves?
Well, because they have come to honour an artistic event, an event of high culture. That is very unusual. In the news market, you cover politicians and heads of states coming to some important societal or political event. But this is art. I mean, Chris Smith was there. All the intelligent community from both Germany and Britain were united in forging a new sort of bond of kinship and looking
Michael,
at painting.
you've just been in Israel. A quick reflection on, we now have a new Prime Minister, a 7-party coalition.
7 parties, yeah. And we're not talking about...
A schizophrenic coalition.
Yeah, we're not talking about noisemakers kind of party. Yes, it's a strange time there. Sharon promises greater security, and certainly the Israeli Defense Forces are active in the occupied territories. Palestinian Authority is meeting even as we speak.
But what about all these ex-generals who are running Israeli politics now?
Well, this is the thing that I was talking to a young American who made Aliyah, as it's called, moved to Jerusalem 5 years ago. And he stood in the middle of a wonderful open space. He said, can we have some real politics here? Because this was at a point when Sharon was negotiating with Ehud Barak, whom he had defeated roundly in the election. Oh, come and be my defense minister. And you think, well, wait a second. This is Likud. This is the hard right. Barak is labor, kind of socialist, allegedly more progressive. They're talking about coming together. It is baffling and bizarre. But, you know, in Israel, you have to be a general to be a top politician, or you used to be. That generation may be passing. And so you have basically a politics of generals, which I think is a very, very strange thing.
All right, Michael, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's now move on to the environment, saving our planet and sustainable growth. On Tuesday, Tony Blair very ostentatiously donned his green political clothing and committed Britain to a new £100 million of spending on wind, solar and wave power. Environmentalists present at his speech were broadly welcoming, but still wanted much more. Is this a real, if belated, pre-election commitment in the spirit of Rio and Kyoto, or should we be suspicious, I beg your pardon, of a politician at work before an election, especially after the Greens did unexpectedly well in Britain's Euro elections 2 years ago? Marie-Françoise?
I think it was lip service, frankly. I don't believe that...
£100 million?
Not yet. It's in 2 years' time. I don't know. Not yet. Not yet. Yes, 1 year's time. So
but it's going to come.
Yes. Okay. Good for Britain, because you need quite a lot of things. And on the following day there was a budget, and then Brown, lower the prices of petrol and so on. So it's really, you have one hand forgetting what the other one does. So I think it was only lip service. Sorry.
Tom Keelinger.
Well, I think you can understand why the public have become cynics, each one of them, about what politicians say. There has been far too much announcement politics under Blair. This is yet one more announcement, while everyone agrees that this was the most passionate speech that Blair has given on it.
Well, Friends of the Earth called it his strongest ever
Well, that's all very
speech.
well. I'm sure I understand why they rejoice, but actions speak louder than words. And we haven't seen too much action on this front. On the contrary, as Marie just pointed out, a day later, there was relief for motor car taxes, for the price of petrol, and by the time this money comes on stream in April 2002, there'll be so much more damage done to the environment that 100 million is not going enough to redress the balance. So why does he give these speeches? Why does he make the public more disaffected about the trustworthiness of politicians? It worries me greatly, because I think there's far too much emphasis on the rhetoric and far too little sober, traditional, old-way implementation politics. And people in government here should continue to say, I don't want to be judged by my words, I want to be judged by my actions.
In the meantime, he was squabbling with Ken Livingstone about public transport in Britain and so on. So it's really...
Michael Goldfarb, what's going to happen when he meets George W. Bush at the G8 meeting and they start talking about the environment? George W. wants to protect the oilmen and the big business of Texas so they can keep polluting.
Yeah, I think that George Bush will charm him. This is everybody says he's charming. I've never been charmed by him across the television screen. So, but I think that he'll put his arm, right there on his bicep and say, "That's a good idea," and turn away.
Well, they'll outcharm each other.
They will try to outcharm each other. What I find
but
interesting,
will Blair push hard and say
I think
environment?
Blair might
George.
well. I mean, because one of the most interesting things now. I mean, Blair is 47. He's actually the senior leader now.
No, don't forget
G8.
Mr. Chrétien of Canada.
Oh, Jean
He's
Chrétien.
been there longer.
Oh, but
Canadians will be very upset.
I'm sorry
by
about that. And my apologies to all my Canadian friends for that slip. But Blair has. I mean, I think Tony Blair
Can he
actually
lead
has
the world on the basis of the environment, though?
I think that if there's going to be a coalition built amongst the leaders of the G7, and we'll leave Russia to the side at the moment, and no offense to my Russian colleagues either, then Tony Blair could be the one to do that, to say, look, we do actually face, and we can argue the economic case here. We have extremes of weather that we haven't experienced before. Clearly there is such a thing as global warming. We need to start taking action now. And I think that if there's someone on the world stage who has the length of service, it could be Tony Blair. And he gives these speeches, and they're often not backed by policy, but there is, I think, inside of him, he is, as has often been described, a Christian socialist. And he may actually feel that this is a cause worth stepping up for in a second term.
What about this point, Richard, that they didn't tax the car heavily? They reduced duty on petrol in the budget, which we talked about.
That's the real politics of it all, isn't it? They can talk till they're blue in the face at the G8, which presumably George Bush thinks is some sort of Formula One racing car. But they can talk forever about this. But until any of them start actually tackling the cars in their own country, nothing's going to happen. It's cars, isn't it? I mean, that's the first thing you've got to take. And You can't. I mean, you've only got to...
industry as well, and if you could figure out another way to power your power stations, like the winds that howl across this particular island we're seated on, then perhaps you could cut down industrial
that is true,
emissions.
but George Bush is governor of Texas. What's he going to do? Is he going to tell Texas to stop producing oil? Of course he's not.
But you can give up your cars if you have good public transport. Nothing is done in Britain. Look at the railways, look at the underground, look at everything.
And when they did try to bring in parking restrictions by charging people to go in, and Prescott wanted to do that, Tony Blair stopped it. So
why did Mr. Blair talk about hydrogen fuel cells this week then?
Well, because I think that's the way of the future. There could be something in it in years to come, but you've got to make this interlocking...
Would the public have been drawn in that way?
Not overnight, not overnight. You've got
not
to keep
a sexy
having
soundbite, is it? I probably thought he was referring to Peter Mandelson.
And you probably need Michael Jackson to help him sell it. But no, I mustn't be over-cynical. It could be something worthwhile, but it's got to be made interlocking with other government policies. And as Francois, again, I am sorry to have to agree with you so often on this programme. I want to think of something to not agree with you.
No, this is the Franco-German axis.
But, probably, yes. You always there's a conspiracy background here. But no, there's this policy on public transport which is completely bust and broken down. And people are not being encouraged to give up the car to this country.
And you haven't been invested for 10 years. Of course, you have lousy public transport.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much indeed. Let's now move on to the final issue. And I do this rather hesitatingly. I just want to check what my international guests think of Wales. Some of you will know that the TV quiz show presenter Anne Robinson caused a storm on a separate programme, Room 101, by choosing the nation of Wales as her pet hate, branding the Welsh irritating and asking what the Welsh are for. Welsh police are now considering laying charges of racism after receiving complaints by MPs and civil rights groups. Michael Goldfarb, quickly, your view of Wales.
I'm very fond of the place. On the 2 occasions I've crossed the Severn and visited, and I know that Anne Robinson is off to the United States, where she's going to have to watch her tongue much more closely.
Racism in Wales, by hating the Welsh.
Well, I saw that performance, and it was singularly ill-tempered and unfunny. And if I was Welsh, I would have been offended.
I disagree. I think it was funny. It's meant to be funny. You are to have you lost your sense of humour in Britain, for God's sake? Maybe in Wales, but I thought the English. And if I may say so, everybody is making jokes about the Welsh and so on. I remember when Neil Kinnock was really the leader of the Labour Party, you know, and there was an election and so on. I remember how many of my English friends said he can't become Prime Minister. He's Welsh.
And he didn't become Prime Minister.
Absolutely. Not only he has got ginger hair, but he's Welsh, so, you know, he's a loser.
Now, Tom Keelinger, you lived in Wales for 4 years. You taught
you
there.
make it sound as if it's an impossible thing to have done.
Your view of Wales?
Well, obviously I'm biased because I lived amongst the Welsh and I consider them one of my favourite peoples anywhere in the world. And this constant sort of talking down their nose by the English about Wales is not funny at all. I totally agree with Michael. It is shop-worn, it's unimaginative, and it speaks with such arrogance that there's one really foreign culture in your great British Isles, the Welsh, and that you sort of look down on them, despise them, as you would only in olden days have despised some other foreign culture from way beyond your shores. I think it's despicable, it is indefensible, it's not to do with sense of humour, it's shop-worn, and it's totally outrageous.
They have an impossible language with plenty of difficult things, of course, and long words and so on.
Beautiful, only because you can't speak it, you say it's impossible.
Can you? Can you?
No, but I would never
You
say
lived
it's
there for
impossible.
4 years.
I think you're showing the traditional humour of the German people.
Yes, exactly.
Define that without being racist. Define it without being racist.
Not much laughing, I think, probably.
Your view of the Welsh?
Well, actually, I'll give you my view of Anne Robinson instead, which is, I know Anne Robinson very well. And what isn't known about her is that actually she very nearly came from Wales because she comes from Crosby, which is not very far away from North Wales.
In Lancashire?
Yes, well, I've been very, very close to Wales, so perhaps there's just a little bit, and she is red-headed.
Yes.
So there's perhaps just a little bit of Welsh in there somewhere.
Red-headed, red meat must go together.
Wales is a very beautiful place.
An important fact that Tom reminded me of just before we came on air is that there are Welsh-German interpreters.
Yes, there's one young Welsh woman, academic woman.
Which is recognition of Wales.
She lives at the National Library in Aberystwyth. and she was given a prize for what she did in terms of intercultural relationships, and she addressed a high-minded, glitzy crowd in London not so long ago in Welsh. And after 5 minutes she stopped because it was John Redwood sitting in front of her, and she said, "Oh dear, I have to speak a language that everyone understands, including John Redwood." So she gave the same in English.
Were you surprised that this speech wasn't reported?
It was reported. This was
in
reported.
Welsh, of course.
It was
Not quite
reported.
so many Welsh now, because we've all got holiday homes over there anyway, because all the
That's
Welsh are here and all the British
Richard,
are there.
I have to stop you there.
And
We
you
have a
have
lot of fans for Wales here, so there's counterbalance here on the BBC. That's it for this week from me, Nick Gowing, and all of my guests and the team. Thanks for joining us. I'll be back with Dateline London at the same time next week. Until then, bye-bye.
Good morning. Pretty cold night compared with the last few. There's a frost around, but particularly so in Northern Ireland. That might well lead to icy stretches if the roads haven't been gritted or salted, and there's a bit of fog around as well, fog in patches, but that won't last too long. The breeze is too much for it, and the day will be characterised by, for Scotland, a lot of cloud and snow still falling in the Highlands. That'll drift slowly north into Orkney as the day goes on, leaving the central belt dry. And then you pick up showers just touching Northern Ireland, more concentrated through Wales and central and southern England. By the afternoon, I think they'll be pretty widespread, though briefly you'll get some sunshine as they go through, say for example for Western England in the afternoon. The temperatures, they're not bad at all. We did have a 14 in Harden yesterday. We probably won't see that again, but 10s or 11s should be pretty well widespread. So a little cooler than Sunday, but not cold, though the exception, of course, once again, is Scotland. And briefly for Tuesday, the concentration here of rain is likely to be in southern Britain. It remains cold, but brighter in Scotland.
Our face is nature's named hair. Imagine, however, not being able to recognize one of your own children.
He could look at your left eye, then he could look at your nose. His problem is he can't put it all together into one picture.
John Cleese discovers the many secrets of the human face, Wednesday at 9:10 on BBC One.
The weather, constantly changing, difficult to predict. BBC News 24 weather updates, also constantly changing, but at 27 and 57 minutes past every hour, very easy to predict. BBC News 24 weather updates, twice an hour, every hour.
Zapatista rebel leaders are given a hero's welcome in Mexico City. The left-winger Bertrand Delano is well ahead in the race for mayor of Paris. The UN Secretary-General criticizes Taliban for destroying Afghanistan's Buddhist statues, and Japan prepares for more turmoil on the stock market despite government reports of growth in the economy. Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Clarence Mitchell. Well over 100,000 supporters have turned out to witness Mexico's Zapatista guerrilla movement become the first rebel group to march into the capital's main plaza since 1914. The rebels led a procession of their supporters through the streets of Mexico City in the climax to a 2-week nationwide march. Along the way, they've been gathering support for their demands for greater rights for Mexico's indigenous people.
It's become known as the Zappa Tour, and it ended right here in the heart of Mexico City. Winding up a 2-week rally around southern Mexico, the Zapatista leader was greeted by cries of "Long live the Zapatistas" by a crowd the organizers numbered at